The sound of hooves against hard, packed earth broke the morning stillness as Sarah Zimmerman stood on her porch with hollow cheeks and desperate eyes, watching the approaching rider with a mixture of pride and despair. The drought of 1878 had turned her promising wheat fields into a graveyard of brittle stalks, and now, 3 months after her husband's death, she was facing starvation in the vast, unforgiving Wyoming territory. Sarah shaded her eyes against the harsh August sun, her worn cotton dress hanging loose on her once full frame. At 26, she had already weathered more than most women twice her age the journey west from Pennsylvania, the loss of her parents to cholera, and now, widowhood on a failing homestead outside Riverton. Her long auburn hair, once her pride, hung limply in a braid down her back, its luster diminished like her hopes. The rider drew closer, and Sarah recognized Owen Fairfield, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy who worked at the Triple J Ranch 10 miles to the north. She had seen him occasionally in town, a quiet man who kept to himself despite his striking appearance. With his sun-bronzed skin, keen blue eyes, and sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, he was the subject of much whispered admiration among the unmarried women of Riverton. Sarah straightened her spine, determined not to appear as desperate as she felt. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that she'd stretched her last cup of beans into 3 days of thin soup. She had no idea why Owen Fairfield was approaching her isolated homestead, but she would face him with whatever dignity she had left. "Morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," Owen called as he reined his chestnut gelding to a stop. His voice was deep and gentle, with none of the brash confidence so many cowboys affected. "Mr. Fairfield," she acknowledged with a stiff nod. "What brings you this way?" He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his impressive height. In his arms, he cradled a burlap sack that appeared to be filled to capacity. "I heard about your crops," he said simply, his eyes taking in her too thin frame with concern rather than pity, "and about Mr. Zimmerman's passing. My condolences, madam." Sarah swallowed hard, fighting the sting of tears. "Thank you." Owen lifted the sack slightly. "I brought some provisions, nothing fancy: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, some dried apples." He paused, seeming almost embarrassed. "There's a hen in the crate tied to my saddle. She's a good layer." Sarah stared at him, stunned into silence. Pride warred with desperate hunger in her chest. "I don't take charity, Mr. Fairfield," she finally managed, though her voice wavered. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "It's not charity, Mrs. Zimmerman. It's being neighborly." He set the sack on the porch step. "Times get hard for everyone at some point. My family wouldn't have survived our first winter in Colorado without help from strangers." Before she could formulate a response, he continued, "I noticed your well pump needs fixing. I could take a look if you'd allow it." Sarah hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. The pump had been broken for weeks, forcing her to haul water from the creek a quarter-mile away, backbreaking work that consumed precious energy she couldn't afford to lose. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. "You hardly know me." Owen looked toward her failed fields, then back to her face. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one should face hardship alone." There was something in his direct gaze that broke through Sarah's carefully constructed walls. He wasn't offering help with the condescending air of the town ladies' aid society, who had visited once with small baskets and large opinions about a woman trying to manage alone. "The pump is around back," she said finally. "I'd be grateful if you could look at it." As Owen retrieved his tools from his saddlebags, Sarah carried the precious sack of provisions inside her small cabin. Her hands trembled as she placed the beans and flour on her nearly empty shelves. The coffee, real coffee, Not the chicory substitute she'd been drinking brought tears to her eyes. Through the window, she watched Owen examining the pump, his movements methodical and assured. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing of the swaggering cowboy so common in these parts. Instead, he worked with a quiet competence that spoke of experience and patience. Sarah filled her kettle and placed it on the stove. The least she could do was offer him coffee after his long ride. As she stoked the fire, she allowed herself to wonder why a man like Owen Fairfield, who could have his pick of the eligible women in town, would ride 10 miles to bring food to a struggling widow. Owen worked steadily on the pump, replacing a worn leather gasket and tightening loose bolts. The Wyoming sun beat down on his broad shoulders as he concentrated on his task. He had noticed Sarah Zimmerman in town several times over the past year, always polite but reserved, standing slightly apart from the other women with a quiet dignity he admired. When he heard about her husband's death from pneumonia in the spring, followed by the devastating crop failure, something had compelled him to help. Perhaps it was the memory of his own mother struggling after his father died. Or perhaps it was something in Sarah's eyes, a strength that refused to be broken, even in the face of overwhelming odds. By the time Sarah called him for coffee, Owen had the pump working smoothly again. He washed his hands in the fresh, cool water with satisfaction before joining her on the porch. "It should work fine now," he said, accepting the steaming cup she offered. The gasket was worn through and a couple of bolts needed replacing. "I'm very grateful, Mr. Fairfield." Sarah sat in the second chair, her own coffee untouched. "But I still don't understand why you've gone to such trouble." Owen looked out over the parched fields, gathering his thoughts. "My foreman mentioned your situation, said you refused help from the town council." A slight smile touched his lips. "Said you were too stubborn for your own good." A flush colored Sarah's pale cheeks. "I don't need their pity." "No, you don't," Owen agreed. "But accepting help when it's offered isn't the same as taking pity." He took a sip of coffee. "This homestead, it's a lot for anyone to manage alone, especially with the drought." Sarah's fingers tightened around her cup. "Are you suggesting I should give up? Sell out to one of the big ranchers who have been circling like vultures since Thomas died?" "No, madam," Owen said calmly. "I'm suggesting you might need a hand until things turn around. The Triple J can spare what I brought today, and I can bring more next week." "And what would you expect in return?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Owen met her gaze directly. "Nothing. Except maybe that you do the same for someone else when you're able." Sarah studied him, searching for deception and finding none in his open expression. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased. "I baked some corn bread with the last of my meal," she said. "It's not much, but I'd be honored if you'd share it with me." It was a small offering, but Owen understood the significance. He nodded, a genuine smile warming his features. "I'd like that very much, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Sarah," she said softly, "if we're to be neighbors helping each other, you might as well use my given name." "Sarah," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it. "And I'm Owen." That first shared meal was simple corn bread and coffee, but as they talked, something shifted between them. Owen spoke of his work at the Triple J, of the cattle drives and the changing seasons. Sarah told him about her journey west, her voice growing animated as she described the farm she and Thomas had planned to build. "It was supposed to be the start of something new," she said, gazing out at the withered fields. "Thomas believed wheat would grow well here, better than cattle. He had such dreams for this place." "The land is good," Owen affirmed. "With rain and time, it could be everything he imagined." When Owen finally rose to leave, the afternoon shadows had lengthened considerably. "I should get back," he said reluctantly, "but I'll return next Saturday with more supplies." Sarah walked him to his horse, the hen now settled in a makeshift coop Owen had fashioned from an old crate. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You just did," he replied simply, mounting his gelding. He tipped his hat to her. "Until next week, Sarah." She watched him ride away, a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun until he disappeared over the ridge. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope warm her chest. She turned back to her cabin, already planning how to make the precious provisions last until his next visit. True to his word, Owen returned the following Saturday with more supplies: flour, sugar, salt, bacon, and even a small sack of seed potatoes. "For next spring," he explained. "But if you plant some now in that sheltered spot near the creek, you might get a small crop before winter." This time, Sarah was better prepared for his visit. She had used some of the flour to bake a proper loaf of bread and had collected wild berries that morning. The hen, whom she'd named Henrietta, had already provided 3 eggs, which Sarah had saved for this meal. After they ate, Owen helped her prepare a small plot for the potatoes, working the soil with a skill that told Sarah he'd done farm work before ranching. As they worked side by side, Sarah found herself watching his hands, strong, capable hands that moved with purpose and care. "Were you raised on a farm?" she asked, curious about his background. Owen nodded, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. "In Missouri until I was 16. My father had a small place, mostly corn and some livestock. After he died, we couldn't manage it. My mother sold everything and took my sisters to live with her brother in St. Louis." A shadow crossed his face. "I headed west instead. Alone, at 16. Sarah couldn't imagine it. "I was tall for my age and I could ride." He shrugged. "Found work with cattle outfits, learned the trade. Been with the Triple J for 3 years now." "Do you miss farming?" Sarah asked, noticing how naturally he handled the soil. Owen considered this as he finished digging a furrow. "Sometimes. There's something about growing things, watching seeds become food, that satisfies in a different way than ranching." He glanced at her. "But cattle are more reliable in this country, less dependent on rain." Sarah nodded, understanding all too well. "Thomas used to say that too, but he was stubborn, wanted to prove wheat could thrive here." She smiled sadly. "He never did anything the easy way." "Sounds like he matched you well," Owen said gently, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Sarah laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "I suppose he did." As the weeks passed, Owen's Saturday visits became the center around which Sarah's life revolved. Each time he brought provisions, but also news from town and stories that made her laugh. He always found something to repair or improve around her homestead, fixing fence posts, patching the roof, building proper shelving in her root cellar. By mid-September, Sarah had regained some of the weight she'd lost, and color had returned to her cheeks. The small plot of potatoes was thriving, promising at least some fresh food before winter set in. Owen had brought 2 more hens to join Henrietta, and the steady supply of eggs became a valuable source of protein. One Saturday, Owen arrived with a surprise: a young milk cow tethered behind his horse. "Her name's Daisy," he explained as Sarah stared in astonishment. "She's gentle and gives good milk, but the ranch has more than we need. Foreman suggested she might do better here." Sarah approached the placid Jersey cow with wonder. Fresh milk was a luxury she hadn't enjoyed since before Thomas fell ill. "Owen, this is too much," she protested, even as she stroked the cow's soft nose. "The foreman was just going to sell her," Owen insisted. "She's small for a commercial operation, better suited for a family farm." Sarah looked from the cow to Owen's earnest face, understanding what remained unspoken. A family farm needed a family, and she was just one woman alone. Still, the gift was too precious to refuse. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take good care of her." That evening, after Owen had helped her build a simple stall in the lean-to behind the cabin, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The September air carried a hint of the coming autumn, and Sarah pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders. "Winter will be here before we know it," she murmured. Owen nodded, his profile strong against the fading light. "Are you worried?" he asked directly. Sarah considered the question honestly. "Less than I was. Thanks to you, I have food stored, firewood stacked, and animals to provide milk and eggs." She turned to look at him. "But I still don't know how I'll manage the spring planting alone, or if I should even try wheat again." Owen was quiet for a long moment. "What if you tried something different? The soil here might be better for oats or barley, less water needed than wheat." "I don't know the first thing about growing either," Sarah admitted. "I do," Owen said simply. "My father rotated crops: corn, oats, sometimes barley. I could help you plan come spring." The easy assumption that he would still be visiting months from now warmed Sarah more than her shawl. Over the weeks, she had come to look forward to their conversations as much as the provisions he brought. There was a steadiness to Owen that calmed her, a thoughtfulness that invited her to share ideas and memories she'd kept locked away since Thomas died. "I'd appreciate that," she said. Then, gathering her courage, she asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Owen, why have you kept coming? Surely your Saturdays could be better spent in town or resting after a long week's work." Owen turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Do you want me to stop coming?" "No," Sarah said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "No, I wonder what people must think, you riding out here every week." A small smile touched Owen's lips. "People will always talk. Doesn't much matter to me what they say." "And your foreman, does he mind you borrowing the ranch wagon for these deliveries?" "He's the one who suggested I bring Daisy," Owen reminded her. "Truth is, he lost his wife young, understands what it is to struggle alone." Sarah nodded, grateful for this unknown ally. "And the other hands, do they tease you about visiting the widow Zimmerman?" Owen's smile widened slightly. "Some tried. Once." Sarah could imagine how that had gone. Though quiet by nature, there was steel in Owen Fairfield. She had seen flashes of it in the set of his jaw when he spoke of injustice, in the controlled strength of his hands as he worked. "I keep coming because I want to," Owen said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "Because seeing you each week matters to me." The simple honesty of his statement took Sarah's breath away. For weeks, she had told herself that Owen's visits were acts of charity or neighborly kindness. To hear him acknowledge a deeper motivation sent a flutter of both fear and excitement through her chest. "It matters to me too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen reached across the space between their chairs, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of her rocker. The touch was gentle, questioning, and Sarah turned her palm up to clasp his fingers in answer. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, their joined hands a bridge across the space between them. The following Saturday, Owen arrived with more than just provisions. In the back of the borrowed ranch wagon was a plow. "It's old, but it works," he explained as he unloaded it. "The Triple J had it sitting in a storage shed, hasn't been used in years. Foreman said if I could fix it up, I could have it." Sarah ran her hand along the worn wooden handles, marveling at the sturdy craftsmanship. "You fixed this for me. Spent every evening this week on it," Owen admitted. "Thought it might help come spring. Or even now, if you want to try a winter wheat crop in that south field. It's sheltered enough, might work." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. A plow meant independence, the ability to work her own land without hiring help she couldn't afford. It meant Owen believed in her future here. "I don't have a draft horse," she said, practical despite her excitement. "I thought of that too." Owen gestured to the wagon. "I brought harness that can be fitted for Daisy. She's small but strong enough for light plowing if we don't push her too hard." "We?" Sarah questioned, her heart racing at the implication. Owen met her gaze steadily. "I can help on Saturdays, teach you how to handle her, and maybe—" he hesitated. "Maybe I could take some of my accumulated days off when it's time for the main planting in spring." Sarah was momentarily speechless. This was no small offer. A cowboy's time off was precious and rare. That Owen would spend his on her farm spoke volumes. "Why would you do all this?" she asked, needing to hear his reasons. Owen's expression softened. "Because I've never met anyone like you, Sarah. Your strength, your determination, even when things were at their worst, you didn't give up." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "These past weeks, getting to know you, helping you rebuild, it's given me purpose beyond just another season of cattle drives and ranch work." The sincerity in his voice touched Sarah deeply. She had been so focused on survival that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge the growing connection between them, the way her heart lifted when she spotted his approach, how their conversations flowed easily from practical matters to deeper subjects, the comfort of his steady presence. "I thought I was finished with dreams when Thomas died," she confessed, "that it was enough just to survive, but you've made me believe in possibilities again." Owen's smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual seriousness and revealing the warmth beneath. "Then let's see what's possible," he said, offering his hand. Sarah took it, feeling as though she was stepping onto a new path, one less certain than widowhood, but infinitely more hopeful. That afternoon, they worked together to fit the harness to Daisy, who accepted the new equipment with placid patience. Owen showed Sarah how to guide the cow with gentle commands and pressure, explaining the basics of plowing as they walked the field's perimeter. "We won't actually plow today," he said. "Daisy needs time to get used to the harness first, but maybe next weekend if the weather holds." By the time they finished their work, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Sarah had prepared a heartier meal than usual, a stew with vegetables from the small garden Owen had helped her plant in August, fresh bread, and a dried apple pie. As they ate by lamplight at her small table, Sarah realized how different her cabin felt with Owen there. What had been a lonely shelter after Thomas died now felt warm and alive again, filled with conversation and shared purpose. Owen seemed to sense her thoughts. "This reminds me of home," he said, looking around the cabin with appreciation. "My mother always kept things simple but welcoming like this." "Do you ever write to her?" Sarah asked, curious about the family he rarely mentioned. A shadow crossed Owen's face. "She passed 3 winters ago, influenza." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly, understanding his loss all too well. "My sisters write occasionally," he continued after a moment. "They're both married now with children of their own." A wistful smile touched his lips. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have that, a family, roots somewhere, not the life of a cowboy." Sarah asked, remembering how many of the ranch hands lived moving from outfit to outfit, spending their pay in saloons, growing old without connections. Owen shook his head. "I've saved most of what I've earned these past 10 years. Always thought I might find land someday, settle down." His eyes met hers. "Just never found the right reason to stop moving. Until recently." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Instead, Sarah served the pie, and they spoke of lighter things, town gossip Owen had heard, books they had both read, childhood memories. When it was time for Owen to leave, Sarah walked him to his wagon. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant above them in the vast Wyoming sky. "Next Saturday, then?" Owen asked, lingering beside his horse. "I'll be here," Sarah promised. Owen hesitated, then slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her cheek. The kiss was gentle, respectful, but it sent warmth cascading through Sarah's body. "Good night, Sarah," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Good night, Owen," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She watched until his wagon disappeared into the darkness, then pressed her fingers to the spot where his lips had touched her cheek. Marveling at how much her life had changed since that first day, he rode onto her homestead. As October progressed, Owen's Saturday visits took on a new dimension. While he still brought provisions now more focused on winter preparations, like preserved fruits and extra flour, their time together became less about survival and more about building something new. True to his word, Owen taught Sarah to plow with Daisy, and together they prepared a small field for winter wheat. The work was hard but satisfying, and Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in years, as Daisy stubbornly refused to walk in straight lines, often veering toward particularly tempting patches of grass. "She has definite opinions," Owen observed, gently guiding the cow back to their intended furrow. "Reminds me of someone else I know," Sarah teased, nudging him with her elbow. Owen's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I can't imagine who you mean, Mrs. Zimmerman." The easy camaraderie between them had deepened into something more profound. Each week, their goodbye included a brief touch, Owen's hand lingering on hers, a kiss on her cheek, once a gentle embrace when Sarah shared the painful memory of losing her parents. They were careful, respectful steps toward something neither was quite ready to name. On the last Saturday in October, Owen arrived with more than just his usual wagon of supplies. Tied to the back was a magnificent chestnut mare. "This is Penny," he announced as Sarah came out to meet him. "She's my personal horse, not the ranch's. I thought she might stay here for a while." Sarah approached the beautiful horse, stroking her velvety nose. "Why would you leave her here?" Owen dismounted, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Because I've asked the foreman for permission to stay in the line shack near the east boundary of Triple J land for the winter. It's only 3 miles from here instead of 10. Sarah's heart began to race. "You're moving, temporarily," Owen clarified. "The line shacks need maintenance before the heavy snows come, and someone needs to check the eastern herd regularly. I volunteered." "Because it's closer to me," Sarah said, understanding dawning. Owen nodded, his expression serious. "The winters here can be brutal. I don't like the idea of you being so isolated if something goes wrong. This way, I can check on you more often, help with heavier chores." The practical explanation made sense, but Sarah sensed there was more. "And is that the only reason?" Owen took a deep breath, removing his hat to run a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of his deeper emotions. "No," he admitted, "it's not the only reason. These past months, getting to know you, being with you." He met her gaze directly. "Sarah, I care for you. More than I thought possible. I know it's soon after losing Thomas and I don't expect anything, but I want to be near you if you'll allow it." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were not tears of grief. Since Thomas's death, she had locked away certain parts of herself, the woman who longed for companionship, who dreamed of love and family. Owen's gentle persistence had gradually unlocked those chambers of her heart, allowing her to feel again. "I care for you too," she said softly. "And yes, it's complicated. I love Thomas and part of me always will." She stepped closer to Owen, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "But what I feel for you is real, and I would very much like you to be nearer this winter." Relief and joy transformed Owen's face. Without his usual hesitation, he wrapped his arms around Sarah, drawing her against his chest in a proper embrace. Sarah leaned into his strength, allowing herself to be held for the first time in too long. "I won't rush you," Owen promised, his voice rough with emotion. "We have time." Sarah looked up at him, suddenly certain of what she wanted. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as Owen responded with carefully restrained passion. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Owen rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Sarah asked, her hands still resting on his broad shoulders. A smile tugged at his mouth. "Because I wasn't sure you'd welcome it, and because some things are worth waiting for." The simple honesty of his answer touched Sarah deeply. Thomas had been a good husband, but always in a hurry, quick to decide, quick to act, sometimes without considering her feelings. Owen's patient consideration was a revelation. "When will you move to the line shack?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Owen replied. "I've already packed what little I need." "Then we have today," Sarah said, taking his hand and leading him toward the cabin. "And I'd like to make the most of it." They spent the day in a new kind of companionship, the acknowledged feelings between them casting every interaction in a different light. Their touches lingered longer, their glances held deeper meaning, and when Owen finally prepared to leave at dusk, their goodbye kiss carried the promise of many more to come. "I'll be back Tuesday," Owen said, reluctantly releasing her. "Sooner if the weather turns." Sarah nodded, watching him mount his horse. "Be safe," she called as he rode away, her heart fuller than it had been in longer than she could remember. True to his word, Owen appeared at Sarah's homestead 3 days later, riding through a light dusting of early snow. He brought more firewood for her stockpile and helped her finish insulating the chicken coop against the approaching winter. This new pattern, Owen visiting every few days rather than just Saturdays, transformed Sarah's life. The isolation that had threatened to crush her spirit after Thomas died was replaced by regular companionship and shared work. Together, they prepared her homestead for winter, reinforcing the barn, stockpiling feed for the animals, and ensuring the cabin was draft-free. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from one of the few books Sarah owned, sometimes simply talking about their pasts, their hopes, their dreams for the future. Gradually, hesitantly, those dreams began to intertwine. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah told Owen one evening in mid-November as they sat at her table, a lamp casting warm light over the maps and papers spread between them. "About trying different crops." "And," Owen encouraged, his attention fully on her, "I think you're right. Wheat is too risky with our rainfall, but oats, barley, maybe even rye." She pointed to different sections of the crude map she'd drawn of her land. "We could rotate them like your father did." Owen's expression softened at her use of "we," though he didn't comment on it directly. "That's smart thinking," he agreed. "And maybe reserve this section near the creek for vegetables. The water access makes it valuable." Their heads bent close together over the plans, and Sarah was struck by how natural it felt to be planning a future with Owen at her side. It had been less than 4 months since he first rode onto her land with a sack of provisions, yet she could hardly remember what life was like before he entered it. As November turned to December, the weather grew increasingly harsh. Snow piled high around the cabin, and the bitter Wyoming wind howled across the plains. During one particularly severe blizzard, Owen arrived at Sarah's door nearly frozen, having fought his way through dangerous conditions to check on her. "You shouldn't have risked it," Sarah scolded as she helped him remove his ice-crusted coat. I have plenty of supplies. I had to know you were safe, Owen said simply, his normally tanned face pale with cold. Sarah built up the fire and prepared hot coffee while Owen thawed by the hearth. Outside, the blizzard intensified, snow swirling in white sheets past the windows. You can't go back tonight, Sarah said, stating the obvious. It would be suicide in this storm. Owen nodded, though she could see the conflict in his eyes. Always the gentleman, he was concerned about her reputation. Sarah made the decision for both of them. You'll take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire. I won't take your bed, Owen protested. The floor is fine for me. In the end, they compromised. Sarah gave Owen extra blankets to make a pallet near the hearth while she took the bed. But as the night deepened and the temperature plummeted, the cabin grew increasingly cold despite the fire. Sarah, Owen's voice came through the darkness. Are you warm enough? She wasn't. The bed, positioned against the outside wall, was catching the worst of the draft. I'm fine, she lied, teeth chattering. The sound of movement, then Owen was beside her bed, his expression concerned in the dim firelight. You're freezing, he observed, touching her icy hand. Without further discussion, he gathered the blankets from his pallet. Move over. Sarah hesitated only briefly before shifting to make room. Owen slid in beside her, adding his blankets to hers and wrapping an arm around her shivering form. The heat of his body was immediate and welcome, and Sarah found herself instinctively curling closer. Better, Owen murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Yes, she whispered, relaxing into his embrace. They lay together, fully clothed and perfectly still, listening to the storm rage outside. Gradually, Sarah's shivers subsided as Owen's warmth enveloped her. Despite the propriety they'd carefully maintained, there was nothing improper in this moment, only the practical sharing of body heat and the comfort of human contact during a frightening storm. Owen, Sarah said softly after a long silence, I need to tell you something. I'm listening, he replied, his voice a deep rumble against her back. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over, not just because I loved him, but because I couldn't see a future here alone. I was ready to give up. She turned in his arms to face him, needing to see his expression. You didn't just bring food when I was starving. You brought hope when I had none. Owen's eyes, bright even in the dim light, searched hers. Sarah, I need you to know something too. I've spent 10 years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, until I met you. His hand gently cupped her cheek. You've given me a reason to stay. In the cocoon of warmth they'd created, with the storm howling outside and the fire crackling softly, something shifted between them, moving beyond tentative affection to something deeper and more certain. I love you, Sarah, Owen said simply, the words hanging in the space between them like a gift. Sarah felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I love you too, she whispered, the admission bringing a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. Owen's kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Sarah answered by drawing closer, her hand sliding into his hair as the kiss deepened. There was no urgency, no desperate passion, only the sweet exploration of two people who had found each other against all odds and now had all the time in the world. When they finally parted, Owen pressed his forehead to hers. I want to court you properly, he said, to do this right. Sarah smiled, touched by his old-fashioned sensibility. I think bringing food every week for months counts as proper courting, she teased gently. Owen chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. Maybe so, but I was raised to believe some things are worth waiting for. Understanding his meaning, Sarah nodded. They had both been through enough to know that rushing would only diminish what they were building. Instead, they held each other through the night, talking softly about their pasts, their hopes, the future they were beginning to envision together. By morning, the blizzard had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape and a crystalline blue sky. Owen reluctantly prepared to return to the line shack, his duties to the Triple J calling despite his desire to stay. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised as he saddled his horse. Weather permitting. Sarah stood on tiptoe to kiss him goodbye, no longer hesitant about showing her affection. "Be careful," she said, the words now a familiar ritual between them. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened even as winter tightened its grip on the Wyoming landscape. Owen spent every moment he could spare at Sarah's homestead, helping with chores, planning for spring, and simply being together. On Christmas Day, he arrived with small but thoughtful gifts: a journal bound in soft leather, a carved wooden box for her sewing supplies, and a silver hairpin that had belonged to his mother. "It's not much," he apologized, watching as Sarah unwrapped each item with reverent hands. "They're perfect," she assured him, presenting him with her own gifts: a hand-knitted scarf, a new hunting knife with a bone handle, and a framed sketch she'd drawn of his horse, Penny. Owen stared at the drawing in amazement. "I didn't know you could draw like this." Sarah blushed slightly. "My father taught me. I haven't done much since coming west. There was always too much work, but I wanted to make something special for you." That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing the special meal Sarah had prepared, Owen seemed unusually thoughtful. Finally, he turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous energy she could feel in his hands. Sarah's heart began to race, somehow knowing what was coming even before Owen continued. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," he said. "Being with you, helping you rebuild this place, planning for the future, it's everything I never knew I wanted." He paused, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I know it hasn't been long since Thomas passed, and if you need more time, I understand. But I can't imagine my life without you now." From his pocket, he withdrew a small object, a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Sarah Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but they were tears of joy. The months with Owen had healed something broken inside her, had shown her that it was possible to love again without diminishing what she'd had with Thomas. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her finger. As Owen gathered her into his arms, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced since before Thomas fell ill. This wasn't replacing what she'd lost, but building something new from the ashes of her former life, something strong and enduring, like the Wyoming land itself. "When?" Owen asked, his eyes bright with happiness. "Spring after planting," Sarah considered this. "Actually, I was thinking sooner, perhaps February." She smiled at his surprised expression. "I don't need a fancy wedding, Owen, just you, me, and a minister, and maybe a few friends." "February it is," Owen agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Riverton. Most of the townsfolk approved. They had watched Owen's dedication to the young widow over the months and admired his commitment. A few gossiped about the seeming haste, but Sarah found she cared little for their opinions. In late January, Owen surprised Sarah with news that would change their plans dramatically. "I've given notice at the Triple J," he announced as he entered her cabin one snowy afternoon. "Effective end of the month." Sarah stared at him in shock. "But why? What will you do?" Owen's smile was both nervous and excited. "I've made an offer on the Hendricks place, the small ranch that borders your land to the west." Frank Hendricks is moving to Oregon to be near his daughter, and he accepted. Sarah's mind raced. The Hendricks ranch was modest, perhaps 50 acres with a small cabin and barn, but it adjoined her property perfectly. Combined, their lands would make a viable operation. How? She asked, aware that even a small ranch would cost more than a cowboy's savings. I've been saving nearly everything I earned for 10 years, Owen explained. And Mr. Hendricks is carrying part of the note. He said he'd rather sell to someone who plans to work the land than to one of the big outfits looking to expand. His expression grew more serious. It means we'll be starting with debt and it won't be easy, but together, I think we can make it work. Sarah crossed the room and threw her arms around him, overcome with emotion. Our own place, she whispered. Owen, it's perfect. Their wedding took place on February 14, 1879, in the small church in Riverton. Despite Sarah's suggestion of a simple ceremony, the townspeople rallied around them. The women of the community prepared a feast, while the men ensured the church was warm and festive despite the winter chill. Sarah wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that Owen particularly admired, with her hair arranged in an elegant twist, secured by his mother's silver pin. Owen, in a new suit purchased for the occasion, watched her approach the altar with an expression of such profound love that it brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers in attendance. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the elderly minister beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Owen kissed his bride, a cheer went up from the assembled guests that nearly raised the rafters. The celebration afterward was lively, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As Sarah and Owen finally prepared to leave, the local women showered them with rice and good wishes, while the men slapped Owen on the back with knowing grins. "Are you ready, Mrs. Fairfield?" Owen asked, helping her into the wagon he decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. "I've been ready since the day you first rode onto my land with a sack of provisions," Sarah replied, her eyes shining with happiness. Their first night as husband and wife was spent in Sarah's cabin, soon to be their temporary home, until they decided which of their two dwellings better suited their needs. The familiarity of the surroundings contrasted beautifully with the newness of their relationship, creating a perfect balance of comfort and excitement. In the soft glow of the firelight, all hesitation fell away as they discovered each other fully for the first time. Owen's gentle strength and Sarah's passionate response created a harmony that seemed to have existed between them always, waiting only to be acknowledged. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they spoke softly of the future, the crops they would plant, the animals they would raise, the family they hoped to create together. "I never expected to find this kind of happiness again," Sarah confessed, her head resting on Owen's chest. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." Owen stroked her hair, his touch reverent. "And I never thought I'd find it at all," he said. "I always felt like I was searching for something, never quite knowing what it was." He kissed her forehead. "Until I found you." Spring came early that year, as if nature itself approved of their union. By March, the snow was melting, revealing the dormant land beneath. Owen and Sarah worked tirelessly, preparing both properties for planting. They decided to make the Hendricks cabin their home, as it was larger and in better repair, while using Sarah's original homestead for additional storage and animal housing. With Owen's knowledge of crop rotation and Sarah's determination, they planted a diverse array of crops: oats, barley, a small field of wheat in the most sheltered area, and an extensive vegetable garden. They acquired more chickens, another milk cow, and a small flock of sheep for wool and meat. The work was hard, but they faced it together, finding joy in the shared labor and purpose. In the evenings, exhausted but satisfied, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in spectacular colors, making plans and dreaming dreams. As May turned to June, Sarah discovered she was expecting their first child. Owen's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for: pure joy followed by tender concern for her well-being. "You'll need to rest more," he insisted, immediately strategizing how to reduce her workload. Sarah laughed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant, not ill," she reminded him. "Wyoming women have been working the land and having babies since the territory was settled. I'll be fine." Nevertheless, Owen took on more of the heavier chores as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. By harvest time, her condition was obvious, her rounded belly a source of pride for both of them. The crops yielded well, providing income to pay down their debt and stores for the coming winter. Their son, Thomas Owen Fairfield, was born on a crisp January morning in 1880. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, a combination that delighted both parents. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, cradling his newborn son with careful hands that had once seemed too rough for such a delicate task. "He is," Sarah agreed, exhausted but radiant. "And he's hungry." As she nursed their child, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Just 18 months earlier, she had stood on her porch, starving and desperate, watching a stranger approach with provisions that would save her life. Now that stranger was her husband, the father of her child and the center of her world. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," Sarah replied. "How the worst moment of my life, standing in that failed field knowing I might not survive, led to the best. If the crops hadn't failed, you might never have come." Owen sat beside her on the bed, his arm gentle around her shoulders. "I'd like to think I would have found you somehow," he said. "That some things are meant to be." Sarah leaned against him, their son nursing contentedly between them. "I think you're right," she agreed. "Some things are meant to be." Over the years that followed, the Fairfield farm prospered. Owen's knowledge of agriculture and Sarah's artistic eye for beauty created a homestead that was both productive and welcoming. They had 3 more children: twin girls, Emma and Elizabeth, born in 1882, and another son, James, who arrived in 1885. The failed wheat field where their story began was eventually transformed into a thriving orchard, the trees symbolizing the deep roots they had established in Wyoming soil. Each harvest season, as they gathered apples and pears with their children, Owen and Sarah would exchange a special smile, remembering how their life together had begun with hunger and grown into abundance. On the 10th anniversary of Owen's first visit to her homestead, Sarah presented him with a special gift: a painting she had secretly created over many months, showing him riding toward her cabin that first day, saddlebags full of provisions. "So we never forget how it all began," she said as Owen stared at the canvas, visibly moved. "As if I could ever forget," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "The day I found my home." Their love, born in a time of desperation, and nurtured through seasons of hard work and joy, continued to grow as steadily as the crops in their fields and the children in their home. What had started as an act of kindness, a cowboy bringing food to a starving widow, had blossomed into a lifetime of love, proving that even from the harshest conditions, the most beautiful harvests can grow.